Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, November 9th, 2023. I am thrilled to be here with you, to be able to study together tonight, and I'm grateful to every one of you for being here. Before we begin, I just want to mention specifically for Montreal, we have seen an escalation in the problems in the security situation in Montreal today and over the last several days. Thank God, no one has been hurt, but we must all be vigilant. And I do want to say that I think that it is particularly important that every one of us makes an effort to come to shul this Shabbos, to come to the synagogue. Of course, there will be extra measures in place. We've already put measures in place as well as other synagogues. But I think that it is important to show that we will not be frightened away from our religion, from our synagogues. And we have to make sure that haters will not win. And so I urge you to proudly come to shul this Shabbos. Let's begin tonight with a subject that is all too tragically relevant today, the mitzvah of Hesped, eulogizing someone who has passed away. In this week's Torah portion, the Parsha of Chayei, for the first time, we see the reaction of a surviving relative to the death of a loved one. Sarah passes away, and the Torah says, Vayavo Avraham lispod l'Sarah v'livkosa. Avraham came to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her. Rabbi Tzvi Hurst Weinreb points out that verse is written with great precision. There are two elements to the reaction of Avraham to the passing of his beloved wife Sarah. Lispod l'Sarah, to eulogize her, v'livkosa, and to cry for her. Those are two components, two necessary components of the response to the passing of a loved one. One, crying, is expressing our feelings through sobbing, through tears. And the other component is more cerebral, Hesped, to eulogize, to give a speech. That is something that is well thought out. It is carefully composed. And both aspects are necessary. But there's an important difference because over the emotional aspect, we don't have so much control. Our emotions express. But concerning the words that we say, there we have a lot of control. We plan, we reason, we verbalize, we decide what we are going to say, what we are not going to say. And so we have these lessons in our Parsha about how to go about this important aspect of grieving such a difficult loss. There was a very beautiful eulogy that was written by the great scholar Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, lived in the 1700s. He wrote the famous work on Jewish law called Noda B'Yehuda. And his wife, Liba, passed away. And he wrote a eulogy, a Hesped, for her. And in that eulogy, he notes our text. And let's review the words. Vayavo Avraham lispod l'Sarah, to eulogize Sarah, v'livkosa, and to cry for her. Notice that for crying, a pronoun is used to cry for her, but concerning the eulogy, her name is used, lifkod l'Sarah, for Sarah. And noticing that, Rabbi Landau says that Avraham here is setting an example for all eulogies to follow. Because a eulogy should not just eulogize her, meaning someone that is indistinguishable from others. It has to be Sarah. It has to be a speech that is individualized, that brings clear to every one of us who are listening who this person was and what she stood for and what she meant in this world. Very often at funerals, someone, sometimes a rabbi, all too often, I'm sorry to say, can make impersonal remarks about death, about eternity, cliches, and it doesn't leave us with any impression of this unique person. What is the significance that we learn from their life? And Avraham is teaching us that a eulogy must be about this person. It must bring this person to life in a certain sense for us. Avraham, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb writes, Avraham set the tone for a proper eulogy. He eulogized the Sarah that he knew, not some abstract description that could fit any woman, but an exquisitely detailed portrait of the real Sarah from the perspective of one who shared his life with her. Over the last number of decades, there has been a tussle at Jewish funerals over who will deliver the eulogy. In past years, it was much more common that the rabbi, and only the rabbi, would speak. And there has been a shift in society so that now it is very common for family members to speak. Sometimes it's only family members. Sometimes it's family members and a rabbi. As a rabbi, I have to say that rabbis must share part of the blame for this shift because certainly in years gone by, it is all too common for a rabbi to speak using cliches, platitudes that are not really directed about this person as an individual. And so it's understandable that family members would want to speak because they have a much closer personal attachment. Personally, I think the balance is good. But there are three common shortcomings of eulogies that I notice today that I think are problematic, and I think we should learn from this portion to try to avoid. The first is, very often, eulogies can be trite, can be about very unimportant subjects. So often, a eulogy, especially of a family member, is about food. This soup that she made and these cookies that she made for me. And yes, I understand that that's important and it shows love. But if that's the only thing of significance, is the chicken soup? Are there no other lessons to learn from this life? A second problem is, again, generalities, platitudes, cliches that don't relate to this individual person. And the third problem, which is a serious problem, and again, rabbis, more than their share, have to take responsibility for this. Sometimes eulogies are just false. People say things that are just not true. Yes, According to Jewish law, we are allowed to amplify a person's characteristics. If a person was generous, we're allowed to say they were very generous. But to say they were generous when in fact they were miserly, that's not right. Even if that's their image, even if somebody wants you to say that, eulogies have to be based on the truth. Though not necessarily the full truth. A eulogy is not the place for certain unpleasant or negative things to be said. Certain things are private. Certain things are unflattering. And there should be a certain judiciousness and deliberateness about what will be included. We don't want to paint a false picture, but at the same time, certain shortcomings, a eulogy is not the place. The Rav Yosef Soloveitchik, was famous for his Hespedim, his eulogies. He delivered a number of them throughout the course of his life, and they were all, each one of them, masterpieces. And he worked so hard on them to be masterpieces because he understood and taught that it is crucial that a Hesped is done carefully, that it's well thought out. The Rav would quote a comment of our sages, an incredible comment in Yalkut Shimoni. The rabbis say as follows: a person passes away, their soul comes before the heavenly court to be adjudicated, to be judged. The heavenly court needs witnesses, testimony. What kind of person is this? V'divrei ha'hesped nemarim heim b'toras edus. The eulogies delivered at the funeral are also used by the heavenly court as testimony. V'hameyed edus sheker b'vadai averehi biyado. A person who testifies in court falsely certainly has committed a sin. If the heavenly angels are listening to what the eulogizer says, all the more so it must be truthful. But the Rav points out another point, and he made this point numerous times. He said often there is a situation when a person passes away and we want to speak about that person, that there is a difference between the public persona of a person and the interiority, the inner reality of that person. Sometimes a person may be known to others on a rather simple level, and yet not known to many. There may be great depth, or they may be qualities that are not well known. And in this case, the eulogy serves the purpose of allowing the world to see the depth of this person's character, the greatness of this person that maybe was not recognized during that person's lifetime. And that's a very heavy responsibility to make sure that the person who has passed away, who is being spoken about, is presented in all of their richness, with all of their qualities, even though some of them may have been unknown. Rabbi Yechezkel Levenstein was one of the great Torah scholars and teachers in the Panovich Yeshiva in Bnei Brak, near Tel Aviv, in Israel in the early 1950s. I heard this story from Rabbi Pesach Krohn. So, Rabbi Yechezkel Levenstein had a grandson living in the United States. This boy was 9 years old. He was the love of his grandfather's life. And the boy became sick. Now, at that time in Israel, there were no telephones in people's homes, so it was hard to communicate long distance. If you wanted to make a phone call, you had to go to some public place like a post office. And of course, it was not possible to really give serious news over the phone in those days. Nebuch, the boy, died in New York. And so the family wanted to give the news to the boy's grandfather, Rabbi Cheskel, but they couldn't call him directly. So the family reached Rabbi Nachum Parchovich, who was a scholar living in Jerusalem. They reached him in Jerusalem, and they said to him, please travel to Bnei Brak, from Jerusalem to Bnei Brak to Tel Aviv. Please travel to Bnei Brak and tell Rabbi Cheskel what happened. So that there's someone who is giving this terrible, tragic news in person with sensitivity. Reb Nachum Parchovich came into the home of Rabbi Cheskel, and he said, I have news from America. And Rabbi Cheskel Levenstein understood that his grandson had passed away. They sat together, crying for this beautiful 9-year-old boy who has passed away. While the two of them were sitting there, Rabbi Cheskel's assistant came in and he said, Rabbi Cheskel, it's time to get ready to go. You are scheduled to deliver the Hesped, the eulogy for Rabbi Yitzchak Sher, the great scholar of Slobodka, who had just passed away, and it was publicized that you were going to deliver the eulogy. Everyone is expecting you to come. It's time. You have to go to deliver this eulogy for this great scholar that just passed away. Rabbi Cheskel said, no, I'm not going. He said, if I go to this funeral of this great rabbi and I cry, people will think that I'm crying for this great rabbi, but in reality, I will be crying for my grandson. And I will not shed false tears. A hesped, a eulogy, is different than a tribute. A hesped is a speech that is designed to bring one to tears. A hesped expresses our sadness at losing the physical presence of someone we love, but a hesped should also inform us of the strengths of that person, especially the strengths and greatness that we did not know or fully appreciate. And finally, a hesped should inspire us to emulate this person's best qualities. A hesped should not only be tears of loss and sorrow, but also tears of inspiration and insight. A hesped should help us to live our lives more fully and more richly. Of course, every one of us should think to ourselves, what do we want said about us at our hesped? A hesped is sad, but a hesped is also about life. It's about the meaning of life, the significance of life, the beauty of life. That's the reason that this week's Torah portion, which begins with the death of Sarah, the name of the Parsha is Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. That is what Avraham was able to convey with his eulogy. Okay, so let me ask you a question. Do you think I should make plans tonight to go out and have a good time? I have to confess I am having a good time right now, but do you think I should go out and have a little fun? Because that's my horoscope for today. I'm a Leo, And my horoscope for today says, make plans to get out and have a little fun. So I'm asking this question according to Jewish law. Am I allowed to follow that advice of my horoscope today? Well, it's not so simple. The Torah says in Vayikra, in Leviticus, Lo senachashu. There is a prohibition called nichush. What is nichush? The Rambam explains, do not practice soothsaying like idolaters do. Ein menachashin, soothsaying. What does that mean? The Rambam says, Hamesim simanim la'atzmo, a person who sets up some kind of sign or test for themselves, im yira li kach v'kach, esed davar ploni. If such and such a thing happens, then I will do so-and-so, or not do so-and-so. If a black cat passes in front of me, I will not go out, or, some other kind of superstitious thing. If I allow that type of indicator to control my behavior, that is a prohibition. I'm not allowed to dictate my behavior based on that kind of random, whatever it is, sign. That's called nichush. And the Rambam adds the following words. Ke Eliezer eved Avraham. What we're not allowed to do is what Eliezer, the servant of Avraham, did in this week's Torah portion. That refers to the following narrative, which makes up a very large part of our Parsha. After Sarah dies, Avraham says to his servant Eliezer, my son Yitzchak is single, is not married. I want you to go back to my family, and I want you to find an appropriate wife for my son, for Yitzchak. So Eliezer starts out on a journey, and the Torah says as follows. Vayomar, Eliezer says the following words to God. Hashem Elokei Adoni Avraham, God, the God of my master Abraham. Hakreino lefanai hayom, allow me to be successful today in finding the appropriate woman that will marry Yitzchak. Va'aseh chesed im Adoni Avraham, and do an act of kindness for my master Avraham so that his son will have a wife. And Eliezer says the following words. Hinei anochi nitzav alein hamayim. Behold, today I'm in the place that Avraham told me to go to. He had reached that place. I am going to stand next to the well. In former times, ancient times, that was the meeting place. Everybody gathered around the well to be able to drink water. I am standing by the well. Ubenos anshe ha'ir yotzos l'shov mayim. And the young women of this town come to draw water from the well to bring to their homes for the people in their homes and for their animals. So Eliezer says to God, V'hayah nara asher omar eleh hatina kadech v'eshteh, that if there will be a young woman and she will come out to draw water, and I will say to her, could I please have some water? V'amra, and she will say to me, shesei, yes, of course, here is some water to drink. V'gam gemalecha ashke, and I will also provide water for your camels. So this young woman who will offer more than I'm asking for, osa hochachta la'avdecha liyitzchak. That will be a sign that this is the woman for Yitzchak to marry. Uba'eda ki asisa chesed im Adoni, and thereby I will know that you have done a kindness with my master Avraham. I have a test. And the test will be as follows, Eliezer says. I'm going to stand next to the water, next to the well, and if there will be a young woman, she'll come out, and I'll ask her for water. And she will say, not only will I give you water, I will also give water to your camels, to your animals. That will be the sign that this is the woman that God is telling me is appropriate to marry Yitzchak. Our sages tell us that a young woman came, and her name was Rivka, Rebecca, and Eliezer said to her, "Can I have water?" And she said yes. And then she said the magic words, "And I will also give water to the camels, to your animals." And our rabbis say Eliezer saw something else. Eliezer saw that normally if you're going to draw water from the well, you have to take your pitcher and bend down to gather the water. But a miracle occurred and the water rose up for Rivka. And Eliezer says to himself, this is the test. This is the woman. This is the proof that this is the correct choice for Yitzchak. Okay, so it would seem to be that following a horoscope is not the right thing. I may decide to go out tonight, but I ought not to do so because it's the horoscope, because there is no logical connection. That would be in the category of nichush. It's not proper to follow horoscopes or things like that. But what about Eliezer? The Rambam says that Eliezer was wrong, that what Eliezer did in coming up with this test in order to prove that this is the right person for Yitzchak, Eliezer violated the law of nichush. So let me start by telling you a story, and this is a true story. I heard this story from Rabbi Yisrael Reisman. There was a man, he was a religious man who lived in New York, in Brooklyn, and Nebuch, his wife, died young. This man was left with several young children that he raised. A number of years passed, and someone suggested to this man, this widower, that he should start to date. He should go out to meet a woman. And at that time, he had a son who was also of dating age. So it's kind of interesting that the father and the son were in the process of dating women, obviously not the same women, they're dating women at the same time. So the son asks his father, he says, how are you going to start dating again after all these years? I mean, how are you going to know if it's the right person? Someone of your age, obviously you're not looking for romance or excitement. You know, it's kind of interesting the way an adult child perceives their parent and what's going on in their parent's life. But this is what this son said to the father. Well, how are you gonna know? How are you gonna deal with this new chapter in your life of dating women? You haven't done it in all these years. So the father says to his son, he says, I'll tell you the truth, I don't know. But Eliezer asked for a sign. Really, there were two signs. Again, V'haya hanara asher omar eleh hatina kadech ve'eshte, and it will be that the young woman, where I will say to her, would you please give me water to drink? V'amra, and she will say, I will give you water, and I will also give water to your animals to drink. Osaho chakto lavdecha li Yitzchak. That will be a proof that this is the woman that is chosen for Yitzchak. And secondly, Vatered ha'aina Rivka, Rebecca, bended to fill her pitcher with water. Vatmale kada vata'al, our rabbis say, the water rose up to meet her. She didn't have to bend down to reach it. It was a miraculous event, and Eliezer saw this. And that was the moment when Eliezer knew that this is the woman, even before he knew her name. This is the woman that is chosen to marry Yitzchak. So this man in New York said to his son, that's what Eliezer did. So I davened to Hashem and I said, please give me a sign. You gave Eliezer a sign. Give me some sign. Give me some sign that I'll know that this is the right person. Okay. And he said, I have trust. I have faith in Hashem. then Hashem will give me a sign, just like he gave Eliezer a sign. That's what the man said to his son. Okay. So that night, there was a woman that had been suggested to him, and they had arranged that they were going to have a phone call that night. So they arranged a time that was convenient for the woman to be able to speak for a little while. And this woman was a widow. Her husband had passed away. She had several young children. So he called her, and they started speaking on the phone, and they seemed to connect with each other. It seemed to be going well. It seemed to be a very pleasant conversation. And all of a sudden she says, I have to leave. So the man says, what's wrong? Did I say something to upset you? And she said, no. One of my children just came out of the bathroom and the toilet stopped up and the water's coming up all around me. I have to hang up right now. And the man understood that this was the sign from Rivka, that the water was rising up to meet her. And soon after that, this couple were married. That's a true story. Okay, but what about the Rambam? How do we reconcile Eliezer's behavior? I mean, Eliezer is presented to us in the Torah as a righteous man, trustworthy servant of Avraham. How could Eliezer do something that the Rambam says is a prohibition? So Rabbeinu Nissim and the Ravid and others disagree with the Rambam. And they say, no, this is different. What Eliezer did is very different than nichush. It's not magic or soothsaying or superstition. No. This wasn't a random sign. It is a logical indicator. Eliezer was saying the most important qualification for a spouse for Yitzchak is kindness, concern for others. It's interesting. To my knowledge, and if you can think of another example, please let me know. To my knowledge, this is the only time in the Torah where there is an articulation of why someone chooses their spouse. And Eliezer's judgment is still true today. And I believe this is the reason that this narrative is told in such great length and detail. It takes up most of our Torah portion this week, because this is a story that every one of us needs to learn, because here is where the Torah tells us what to look for in a spouse. And in my experience, when people are looking for a spouse, for a mate, they look for many things. Some more foolish and transitory than others. I see people look for wealth, or beauty, or power. But here's the truth. None of that leads to a happy marriage. There is only one criteria that leads to a happy marriage. There is, without question, the biggest difference in how happy a marriage is how kind and considerate of others each of them are. And that's why Eliezer is a hero, because he understood what was important to Avraham and what would be most helpful to Yitzchak throughout his married life. And of course, in this behavior, Rivka, Rebecca, excelled. So I give you something to think about for a moment. Please don't share your answer. When you were, if this applies to you, when you were looking for a spouse, when you were dating, what were you looking for? What qualities were you looking for? Or if you would be dating or looking for a partner, What would you look for? And if that was some time ago, did you find it? And lastly, if hypothetically you were looking now, would your criteria be the same? Or would they be different? And the reason that I ask this is because, again, this relationship between Yitzchak and Rivka is the only one in the entire Torah that was made, the match was made on the basis of a specific articulated criteria in the words that Eliezer says. I will confess to you, when I was a young man, I did not have any such list. And I'm very happy to say, Baruch Hashem, thank God, my wife and I are happily married almost for 43 years. But I do now have a list, and I told this list to my children, and I teach it and share it with others. And my list comes from this narrative. There is only one criteria that will lead to happiness in marriage, and that is chesed, kindness, compassion, gentleness, forgiveness. Other qualities are very, very nice, but they will not lead to a happy marriage. I think that's why this is the only narrative in the entire Torah that has a discussion of on what basis a person chooses a spouse. Because this message is so important that it be taught clearly and fully so that we can make use of it for ourselves and share it with our children and our grandchildren and our friends and anyone else in this situation. This is what to look for. Here's a story from a woman named Neely Steinberg. You may think the story is a little inappropriate. If you do, I appreciate that, but I think it's true, and I think it's important to verbalize it. So here's the story from Neely. Neely was married to a man named Dave, and after a couple of years of marriage, they had a baby girl. They named her Stella. Mazel tov. Neely delivered Stella through a cesarean, a C-section. And she writes that experience deepened my love for my husband. Now that's kind of curious, but listen to what she says. So she says, some of you know this firsthand, others of us know this secondhand. Recovery from a C-section is not pleasant. Managing the pain requires several days of medication. For the first couple of days, the new mother has to urinate through a catheter. When the catheter is removed, this is the writing of this woman, Neely Steinberg. This is in the Washington Post a few years ago. When the catheter is removed, so begin the wild adventures of getting into the bathroom and onto the toilet. The first time this happens, one of the nurses helped me to do this. But after that, her husband, Dave, was the one who, often in the middle of the night, helped her navigate into the restroom. I'll never forget the way Dave helped me into the bathroom and onto the toilet. Taking my hands as I rolled myself out of bed, he repeated the words, slow, deliberate, walking to the bathroom at a snail's pace, helping me, my face twisting into all sorts of anguished shapes. He would repeat, slow, deliberate, helping me with the very private types of help that were needed. He would then gently, slowly help me back into bed. At the time, I thought This is why I marry this man. Not for his fabulous head of hair, or his beautiful light brown eyes, though those things were certainly bonuses, but no, it was his gentleness, his thoughtfulness, his loving heart, his caring nature that sealed the deal for me. Then she writes, as a dating coach who works with singles in their 20s to 50s, I see a lot of people focusing on superficial things that have little to do with the potential partner's character. I get it. I once obsessed over those things too. And most of all, I see how the trap of chemistry can lead people astray. Chemistry, feeling a physical attraction to each other, is important. But as far as relationships go, it's only half the equation. So she writes, so how do you look for these deeper, more important qualities in the early stages of dating? And she writes, looking back to the early days of dating Dave, all the signs were there. He treated my friends with care and kindness, which showed me he had the ability to be compassionate. He rubbed my back and wiped my tears after I suffered a loss at a squash match, showing me that validating my feelings was important to him. He listened to me vent after a difficult fallout with a colleague, showing me he was ready and willing to be part of my support system. Singles should keep their eyes open for these signs. They're more telling than a person's job, salary, ambition, or education, whether he or she is the right age, has the perfect body, or can dazzle you with their charm and wit. Keep your eyes open for the type of person who one day might lovingly help you onto the toilet. I want to share one last story. And this is also a true story. This story was told by Rabbi Yechiel Spiro. It's about a young man named Baruch. After he was liberated from the concentration camp at the end of World War II, he was placed in a DP camp, a displaced persons camp. Everything in his life, everyone in his family, destroyed, lost. He had to face the challenge of starting over, like everyone else who was there in this DP camp. Baruch was given a job in the camp to distribute shoes. Shoes would arrive, Baruch would place them on a shelf, people would line up and choose shoes in order. First come, first serve, and the system worked well. After some time, amazingly, improbably, in that DP camp, Baruch met a young woman named Rachel, who also lost everyone and everything in her life. For the first time in years, they began to smile. They began to feel hopeful for the future, something that both had feared they would never feel again. One day, Rachel gets in line for shoes. And Baruch notices that her eyes are gazing lovingly at a pair of red shoes on the shelf. Beautiful red shoes. Rachel looked at Baruch, but didn't say a word, and Rachel got in line. But as the line moved forward, it became clear that there was another woman ahead of Rachel who would be able to choose the red shoes. And Baruch was torn because on the one hand, he wanted nothing more in his entire life than to be able to give Rachel these shoes. He had nothing of his own to give her. He so much wanted to show his feelings for her. But on the other hand, the other woman was first in line, and she had every right to the red shoes. So Baruch gave the shoes to this other woman who chose them first. And as he did so, he noticed Rachel lower her head and begin to cry. And it broke his heart. That evening they met, and Baruch tried to explain to Rachel how much he wanted to give her the shoes, how badly he felt. Rachel said to him, "Let me tell you why I was crying. As soon as I came into the room and I saw the red shoes, I wanted them. I looked at you, and I knew you wanted to give them to me. And I saw the other woman ahead of me, and I knew she would ask for them first. So I closed my eyes, and I said to myself, if he gives the red shoes to the other woman, that will be a sign that you are the man I want to share the rest of my life with. And when you handed the other woman those shoes, I was so proud of you. I was so happy I began to cry tears of joy. Tears of joy that we are truly meant for each other." Rachel and Baruch did marry, built a life together, and spent the rest of their lives loving each other in harmony, in respect, in kindness. And that's the sign to look for in choosing a husband or a wife. My friends, I wish you a great Shabbos, a wonderful evening tonight, and I look forward to seeing you all soon in person.